Okay, guys, a rotten Jack Ryan story. Well, that would be 2014's Jack Ryan Shadow Recruit. It has a 55% on the tomato meter and a 53% on the audience score. It has over 64,000 audience reviews. It is quite relevant. It is still playing out there on cable channels where you live. And I'll say I agree with that score. It should be about 50%, certainly no higher than 59%. I would not consider this to be fresh. I consider this just flat out rotten because largely the premise, the actual idea behind how this whole story works is just not believable. It's very far-fetched, and I don't use those words that often to describe a movie because on Rotten Reviews, I'm obviously, most of my time is spent looking at films that are in the fantasy and science fiction and horror genres, and it's basically genres that I am interested in, and I like a lot of fantastical stuff. So it's not often that I can say something is far-fetched, but this one just is. And like a lot of spy material out there, whether it's Mission Impossible or it's something parroting Mission Impossible, a lot of these spy stories, they revolve around lists of agents and double agents that fall into the wrong hands. And, the whole plot's driven forward by one of these lists of agents that you would find on a USB stick that just has to be gotten to before the bad guys do. Well, this one's a little bit different. In this story, the whole plot revolves around a scheme by I don't know, a Russian billionaire running a company in Russia who wants to get his revenge on the United States and the Western world in general, and he wants to collapse the U.S. Western financial system, collapse the banks and the stock exchange, and etc. And he's going to do this in a very far-fetched way involving the timed dumping of U.S. treasuries on the open market. It's only believable to something that knows very little, somebody that knows very little about the way the financial system works. It's like a 13-year-old's version of what would be possible, and it's completely far-fetched. Not only is it a far-fetched scheme to dump U.S. treasuries in a way to collapse the financial system, but it's also far-fetched in every way that this villain wants to execute this plot, and it's also very far-fetched in the way that this simple single CIA analyst by the name of Jack Ryan, he somehow is just able to look at banking records on a terminal in a bank or a financial firm, an investment firm, and just by himself he's able to see all the patterns and discover this scheme, and he knows exactly what the Russian bad guy's up to from the very beginning. And now he must, of course, he must travel to Russia for whatever reason to defeat the Russian bad guy. And the film gives you a whole lot of far-fetched, illogical nonsense about why he needs to go to Russia, this analyst of the CIA, and become an action hero. It's all over the place. We know what Jack Ryan is. He's got a Netflix series, or excuse me, he's got a series on Amazon Prime right now. It's very popular from what I hear. We know Jack Ryan from the other novels out there with him as the character. We know him all the way back to the original Hunt for Red October. But this version of Jack Ryan is a very far-fetched, illogical, and it's trying to make him into an action hero, but the action is also very unbelievable and fake looking, and the effects and the editing done during these action fight scenes, you can see just with the casual look at them that the effects are really bad, they're really fake, and cringe-worthy fake at times. I don't know if it's Chris Pine just not being good in this role as a action hero type of person, or he's just not good at fighting, or the director's just not good at making fight scenes look real. But the fight scenes he has look so fake and so contrived and so done done very cheaply with camera editing tricks, and they're done a very flawed way in which you can see like pieces of porcelain sinks and toilets break off, and you can see they're obviously fake, and you can see that the punches aren't really landing, and you can see that everything is completely fake all the way down the line. But let's get right into audience reviews and find out what the audience thinks. And I have a list here. I'm going to go through really disastrous plot holes that this film has and why it's so unbelievable and far-fetched. But let's get right into the audience reviews on this. I'm going to entertain, of course, only 3-star and below reviews. That's why this is called Rotten Reviews. So we have one from 23 hours ago. This is the last week of January 2020. 2.5 stars, neither horrendously bad nor particularly good. It was only as I was watching this did I realize I'd seen it before and I'd completely slipped my mind, which should tell you everything you need to know. Forgettable with a far-fetched plot and unoriginal execution. The cast is great, I'll give them that. I don't think it'll take long before I forget about it again. Yeah, that reviewer, he's admitting that he forgot he watched this before, and I've done that a couple of times, and that's really, you know, that is saying something about the movie, isn't it? That it takes you half its running time, and then you realize you already watched this. That's pretty forgettable, I would agree. Now, my star review on this, I'm going to say just straight up 1 star. It's worth 1 star. You can watch it just to find out how not to do action spy thrillers, how to do things in a way that definitely it's going to look fake and it's not going to be believable. And you can use this as a study on how to have plot logic that even a 13-year-old might not completely believe. That's how bad it is. Let's just take a look at the top of my list. I mentioned the ridiculous treasury dumping scheme to collapse the Western financial system. That is completely ridiculous. Look into how U.S. treasuries work. Could a villain in Russia accumulate enough control over U.S. Treasury accounts to do something like this? Maybe he could move the market a tiny blip, but you also have to understand that assuming he did start to dump treasuries like this, assuming his plan was sound, which it's not, what would stop the U.S. markets from simply halting trading? What would stop them from halting the redemption of treasuries? What would stop the market from just seizing up? You know, in the real world, when somebody dumps too much of something into the market simply doesn't want to purchase. It just gums up the system. You just can't sell it anymore because nobody's buying. Don't forget, you can't just dump something on the market without a buyer. There has to be a buyer on the other end for the transaction to go through. So there's a lot of ways in which this plot doesn't work, and the movie is just trying to convince you that with the proper strokes on the proper keyboards, you can make this scheme happen. And it's completely ridiculous that Chris Pine's lone analyst character, he's the only one in the whole Western world that happened to be sitting there at a computer terminal and in what is shown to be just a regular investment house of some kind. And nobody else sees this but him. This big, huge plot going on from Russia. It's completely ridiculous. Now, the other aspects of this, yeah, this movie, the CIA, the actual CIA boss, I don't know if it's supposed to be the CIA director or a boss of some kind in the CIA, he flat out states that the United States does not have oil reserves. What? Part of this scheme involves like the fact that Russia supposedly has all these massive oil reserves and the U.S. doesn't have oil reserves. And so once this Russian bad guy sets off his chain reaction of treasury dumpings, it's going to somehow put us out of the oil market too. What? Like, first of all, we have plenty of oil reserves. In fact, we're the #1 oil producing company on the earth at this time. Now, I don't know if this was exactly true in 2014, but I think it actually was. And we're in 2020, but I can tell you that just to state that we don't have oil reserves, or that somehow we can't produce our own oil, or we don't produce enough for ourselves. This is laughable on its face in many ways, and I think it was in 2014 when this was made, so I'm not going to excuse it. It's completely ridiculous. Yeah, one analyst, and only one analyst at a financial firm at a terminal, can see and uncover this entire plan. Wow, then what about all the other analysts that are a lot smarter than the one shown here, that have been doing this for many years, and they didn't get a whiff of this grand conspiracy going on? I'm sorry, it doesn't work like that. Yeah, what else is here on that plot problem? Yeah, this analyst has to go to Russia for some reason. The story is like in a kind of kind of wishy-washy on why Chris Pine's analyst character Jack Ryan has to go to Russia. He has to go to Russia presumably to find out why this Russian businessman is doing his scheme. Like he has to check on the accounts. Like that's his excuse to the villain, that he's shown up to do an audit on the accounts. That there are bank accounts under the villain's control in this financial firm that don't seem right. There's something suspicious about them. So Chris Pine's Jack Ryan has to just show up unannounced to this villain in Russia and say, well, I'm here to do an undeclared audit because I suspect there are these accounts, which you're shown on the computer. There are all these bank accounts that have tens of millions of US dollars in them. I guess they're treasury accounts. Now, how this would be enough to move the market much at all, I don't know. But it's completely ridiculous that like an analyst needs to go over there to do this stuff. And in fact, the villain actually asks Jack Ryan, well, why did you come all the way over here to do this? Couldn't you have just done this from your computer terminal in New York? And, there's never really an explanation on that. And there's other reasons why at different parts of this film in the plot, it's explained why Chris Pine has to be over there. None of these explanations add up. It's basically just so that he can be there to have some kind of action, adventure, showdown with the bad guys in Russia. But none of it's believable in the slightest. And when I keep wanting to say Chris Pine, and I think that's because Chris Pine to me is not a very convincing version of Jack Ryan. I've seen like several different actors by this time play Jack Ryan, some good, some a lot better than others, but Chris Pine just feels like Chris Pine to me. He does not feel like Jack Ryan, not whatsoever, and that's why I keep calling him Chris Pine, but I'm going to try to call his character Jack Ryan. It's going to be a struggle, but I'm going to do it. Now, so Jack Ryan goes to Russia. He shows up unannounced. No one except for the CIA is supposed to know that he's there. He's undercover as just a financial auditor from a financial firm in New York. Okay, fine. But then he shows up and he's got a driver waiting for him that claims that he's the driver that's been assigned to him, and he's armed, and he's apparently a contractor working with the CIA. But later it's revealed this is one of the bad guys from the Russian villain that needs to kill him off in the hotel room. Really? How did the Russian villain know that he was there? He didn't know that he was there. It doesn't make any sense. And then after Jack Ryan kills this driver slash henchman in his hotel room, and then he meets with the CIA in a park. The CIA director or boss is played by Kevin Costner. Kevin Costner just sends him back to the same hotel room after they have a cleaning crew clean out the body and fix all the damage inside the hotel room. That makes no sense. Why would you go back and stay in the same hotel room that the villain obviously knew you were in and tried to kill you in once before? This movie has no damn logic to it. It's so far-fetched. But let's move on right into these audience reviews. And we will return to my list, no doubt, because I've got so much stuff written down here. 2 stars. His girlfriend is hugely annoying. Yeah, his girlfriend, played by, believe it or not, Keira Knightley. She's his girlfriend in New York that suspects that he's having an affair, or he's not telling her the truth about what he's doing when he's supposed to be at work. She just decides to show up in Russia. Yeah, well, the problem with that is you don't just get Russian visas like overnight because you need to go to Russia on a whim. because you think your husband is cheating on you and he happens to be on business in Russia. So you just somehow call somebody up and you just get a Russian visa overnight and show up, and then you're just there in Moscow in the hotel room of your husband. Really? That's not exactly how things work. There is no visa on entry program in Russia. There certainly wasn't in 2014. I know this for a fact. If you wanted to visit Russia as an American in 2014, you needed to arrange your visa ahead of time, and it probably would have taken Jack Ryan's wife, just as a regular civilian in New York, it probably would have taken 10 days to 2 weeks minimum before she could get the necessary visa in her passport. And I'm saying that's probably a stretch. But let's say 2 weeks and then she could be on the plane to Russia. It's just ridiculous. So let's move down. Not to mention, she is annoying. There's kind of like a romance subplot between Jack Ryan's wife, that she's going to, of course, discover her husband is actually working for the CIA. And then conveniently, she's going to be stuck along on this mission with him to play a husband and wife to take down the bad Russian villain. Like the CIA would just allow Jack Ryan's wife to like move in and be on this mission. The whole thing's ridiculous. What I could see happening is Jack Ryan, the analyst, goes there, and let's say he did have the incident in the hotel room where obviously they know he's there and they try to kill him. That would be the end of Jack Ryan in Russia. He would be expedited back to the US out of Russia. And then if there were to be some kind of operation there, it would involve totally different agents. It sure as fuck wouldn't involve Jack Ryan's civilian wife who just happened to show up in Russia to get her nose involved in all of this. It's completely unbelievable, all of the stuff that's going on. And I'm not saying that other Tom Clancy, Jack Ryan novels were believable, but this is the most unbelievable of all of this material that I have so far encountered. And I'm guessing that this isn't exactly this is not an adaptation of Tom Clancy's work. I'm guessing on that one. If it is, it's a really bad adaptation, because I can't believe for a second that any novel of his would have had logic in it this ridiculous. So, I'd be willing to bet money on that. So let's see, 3 stars, December 10, 2019. Star-studded cast did the best they could with pretty bad writing. The movie is at its best when the actors aren't forced to utter the silly dialogue, action sequences competently executed. No, I'm sorry, 1 star. The action sequences were not competently executed. Right off the bat, the first action we got in the hotel room was obviously fake. The first time I saw it, and I wasn't nitpicking it, I was just watching it with an open mind. It looked fake and ridiculous. And the rest of the action, although it didn't look fake at times, it was just boring and unoriginal, and it wasn't what I would call actual action. It just passes for action in the most basic, rudimentary way, not like the type of action you would expect in some other Jack Ryan movie of much better quality than this. No. Even the Jack Ryan TV show on Amazon Prime is far superior to this in every way. So I disagree completely. Yeah, it is a star-studded cast. You have Chris Pine, Kevin Costner, Kenneth Branagh, Keira Knightley. You would think with all those characters, these are all top-notch actors and other material and actress. But no, what do we get here? Something that's it's just a script writing fail, I would suppose. The whole thing is just written like it's got 12-year-old, 13-year-old logic to it. I don't know what to say. It's just like, yeah, the script is shit. That would be accurate. 1.5 stars, December 2nd, 2019. It has action, so I guess that means we are supposed to like it. I guess. Okay. 2 stars, lame and silly. Couldn't even finish it. What was Branagh thinking? I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing his name right. Is it Branagh or is it Branagh? Whichever, we know who he is. He's performed really well in a lot of ways, in a lot of movies. In this one, he just plays a Russian villain. A very forgettable, stupid, cheesy Russian villain with bad lines. And of course, for some reason, this film is also quite annoying in that all of the Russian characters that walk around and talk to each other in boring ways. Not only is it boring and the writing is bad and the dialogue is kind of boring and flat, but it's all in Russian. So we get everything in subtitles, and there's no reason for that. It didn't. Plenty of movies don't have to have all the Russians speaking Russian just because you're in Russia. I'm sorry, but it's just not necessary. And combine that with the really bad dialogue and boring dialogue between the villain and his, I don't know, FSB overseer. Um, it's just all around rotten, completely rotten. You know, I'm almost wanting to give this lower. I'm wanting to almost talk myself down into giving this a lower than, lower than 1 star. Like maybe I want to give this half a star, but no, I'll stick with 1 star. I'm going to at least say, well, I don't know. Something about it kept me watching. I didn't fast forward it. I didn't skip through stuff. I watched the whole thing, so I'm going to stay with 1 star, but I'm kind of hesitating at some points here. 2 stars, August 20, 2019. Kind of an unremarkable or unrememberable film when it's all said and done. Yeah, after another couple of days, I saw this 2 days ago, but after 2 more days, I'll probably forget that I saw this thing. Or forget what it was about at least. 1 star, May 28, 2019. Dreadful plot, dreadful ending, dreadful acting. Yeah. 1 star, loud, noisy, meandering, not believable plot or characters, stinks. 2.5 stars, January of 2019, 1 year ago. Has the intensity of an action thriller, but the plot doesn't really go along with the character's backstory. Well, yeah, let's talk about the character's backstory. This is basically an origin story on Jack Ryan, and I can't recall if other films tried to do an origin story. Maybe they had flashbacks to one degree or another, but in this, it's a straight up origin story. We see Jack Ryan as a college student in New York, and I don't know what he was studying, but he was in college. He's carrying a backpack. He looks like a typical, stereotypical college student. Well, the 9/11 attacks happen, and he sees it on the TV, and then it kind of shakes him or whatever. And it's shown that from the 9/11 attacks, he decided to join the military, and I believe it's the Marines, and all of a sudden it cuts to some scene in Afghanistan, and he's on a helicopter with some other soldiers in Afghanistan, and they're flying, through the mountains. And he is a lieutenant, I believe, in the Marines. I believe that's accurate. And their helicopter gets hit by some kind of enemy fire, and it crashes, and he's put into a hospital. He's at Walter Reed Hospital for months, I guess, from all kinds of injuries to his back and whatnot, and he can barely walk. And then it kind of shows him in rehabilitation at Walter Reed, and that's where he meets his wife, who's a nurse at Walter Reed, played by Keira Knightley. And then it cuts to I guess it's many years later. He has been recruited by the CIA character played by Kevin Costner, who has recruited him from right out of Walter Reed while he was in rehabilitation. And he's now in the CIA, and he has been assigned as an analyst who's put into the role as a financial analyst at some Wall Street firm. And he is supposed to be looking through accounts on Wall Street to find out information for the CIA. So it's an origin story, and it's really rushed, and it cuts between large blocks of time. And I guess we start out at the September 11 terror attacks, 2001. So we're in 2001, and then it takes us through about 12, 13 years worth of time in just a few minutes. Now, Jack Ryan, excuse me. Jack Ryan, for some reason, the CIA needs information on certain bank accounts, so he actually prints out information on paper, puts it in a manila envelope, and then meets the CIA couriers inside like movie theaters, where he passes the documents to them inside movie theaters at night. I have that on my list. It's not quite a plot hole, but it's a problem because In 2013, 2014, why would you print documents from your desk or your printer, your office printer at your financial firm, and need to carry these documents by hand to a movie theater to deliver to somebody? It doesn't make sense. Why not just encrypt and email them? Why not just put them on a flash drive? I mean, there's a myriad of ways that don't involve you doing some 1960s spy bullshit in a movie theater. It doesn't make sense. It was like something pulled out of another time period just to make it seem like spy versus spy type crap. It's ridiculous. If the CIA wanted information on bank accounts in a Wall Street firm. They wouldn't need Chris Pine sitting there to do it at a keyboard, not even in 2014, maybe, probably not even in 2001. So it's completely ridiculous. It's just another ridiculous thing to chuck into this. And I don't consider that a plot hole. It's just a whole lot of, question marks for me. It's something on my list. But let's move on other reviews. Next page. Let's see what we can find. We have 3 stars from October 16, 2018. So we're back, 2 years ago. Or not 2 years. We're back more than 1 year ago. 1 year and 4 months. Jack is CIA movie, good movie for you. Okay. Well, I guess if you're living in a village in Afghanistan, then that could be a review from somebody there. But I'm not going to have much to say on that. September 10, 2018, 3 stars. Good enough film. It has a narrative with more holes than Swiss cheese, but still enjoyable nonetheless. The action was well paced and exciting. Chris Pine's performance, as with most of the cast, was on point. Unfortunately, I didn't enjoy as much Kevin Costner's character choices, or perhaps the direction given to him. He gave flatline performance, and therefore I found him very uninteresting. Yeah, I don't know what the point of having Kevin Costner in his role was. I'm sorry, but there was nothing in the role that needed him to be there. It felt like they should have cast that as somebody else, anybody else, somebody a little bit in better shape, maybe even a little bit older. There's a lot of actors that would have looked better in the role. Yeah, Kevin Costner was just there. I don't know whose idea it was to have him there. He wasn't needed at all. Really, he wasn't. Maybe a kind of a bait and a switch. I don't know. Maybe just to have his name on the credits for people to, purchase tickets. Maybe that's what it was. But on my list here, we have some big problems where, the first real thing that hit me wrong was not only just passing papers to people in the movie theater that didn't seem believable to me at all in the modern day, but also the next thing on my list was when Jack Ryan shows up to the Russian hotel, before he has even actually reached the front desk, the girl at the front desk is addressing him as Mr. Ryan. Good to see you, Mr. Ryan. It felt like this was a problem with editing, like this was supposed to happen later in the film, like maybe another scene at the hotel front desk was cut out and put here to replace something else, because how did the girl at the front desk already know who he was before he even reached the front desk for the first time? He had never even been to Moscow before. So it's, again, I'm saying that there's editing problems with this film, because it's obvious they cut things that were supposed to be in other places and patched them in somehow. And it just hit me really weird, when he approached the front desk like that. And that was at the beginning of his story in Russia, and that kind of pulled me out of the whole thing, because right there I said, oh, yeah, I can see this isn't going to be very good, because we hadn't even gotten to any action in Russia, and already I was seeing a big problem. I was wanting to roll my eyes at it. And that's on my list. The next thing after that on my list is, the bad fight with the black bodyguard or mercenary or henchman or whoever he was. He had a fight with Jack Ryan in the hotel room, and it didn't really add up, because if the bad guys, if the Russian villain knew Jack Ryan was coming before he even got out of the airport, why did the henchman even take him to his hotel room? Why would that be necessary? Why not just drive him somewhere and shoot him and dump him somewhere? It didn't make sense. It would just be too much of a risk. I mean, Why actually have somebody, this Russian henchman, go all the way back to his hotel room? Do they know that his hotel room's going to be safe to do that? I mean, it doesn't make sense. They would have just taken him right from the airport and just killed him and disposed of him. But nope, the plot needed it to be where he had to be taken all the way back to the hotel room. Doesn't make sense, though. And the fight was just really fake looking, and you could see the pre-broken parts of the hotel room breaking as they barely touched them, like fake porcelain and fixtures and whatnot. And then, of course, the whole problem with that is that after this big fight happens and there's a dead body in the hotel room, and it's obvious the bad guys know where Jack Ryan is, the CIA just tells him to go back to the hotel room. It's going to be fine. You can still stay there. I don't think so. Let's move on. 1 star, September 2nd, 2018. It's making the FSB look like child's play, more like a fairy tale rather than a spy movie. Yeah, it's not even clear if it's the FSB that's behind this Russian villain, because what we see is the Russian villain, played by Kenneth Branagh. He just like has these meetings with this shadowy Russian figure out in the woods, and he walks very boringly through the woods with him, and the camera angles are kind of boring too, and you just see them walking slowly through the woods, talking to each other, very boring fashion in Russian about their plans to, crash the financial market. And you don't learn anything from this. It's just like filler. It just pads the running time, and it also doesn't tell you anything about the villain of the story. It doesn't tell you anything about him, and it doesn't tell you about anything about his boss. It's just left up to your imagination that this is some FSB agent, or is it GRU? Is it? I mean, I don't know who it is. It could be anybody. It could be another businessman. The film actually never tells you who is actually the shadowy upper level boss of the actual villain of the film. You just never find out. You're just supposed to fill it in with your own imagination, I guess. And it's very boring, and you never even get any answers on any of that. It's very they're just cardboard Russian villains, basically. You also don't get any setup on why the villain of the story has this big driving motivation to collapse the Western world, why he hates the United States so much. You never actually figure any of that out. They never explain this to you, what motivates him. He just hates the Western world for some reason. And it's left up to your imagination, I guess, on why. But it didn't work for me. 2.5 stars. Wise choice but sloppy adaptation. Jack Ryan Shadow Recruit, 2.5 out of 5. Is a plot-driven spy thriller about a newbie whose professional and personal life is hanging on a thread. The premise does give away the emotional drama that it would draw out at such stuffs, which it does, but in appropriate proportion, and doesn't take its potential concept for granted. There is a lot less thrill in its first act, since it spends too much of the time on setting each character's perspective. It spends a lot of time on Jack Ryan's origin story, and it's not very effective. I mean, yes, you see his origin, but it doesn't give you an idea of who he is as a person or who his wife is. It's still very cardboard. You see him going through the motions, and it cuts between different parts at points in time, but it doesn't really tell you anything about him as a person, and so he still feels like a cardboard character, even though, yes, you know that he was motivated by the September 11 attacks to join the military, but you see it all in a cardboard way. I mean, you don't learn anything from this. 2.5 stars, July 24, 2018. Watchable if formulaic, generic, and derivative. Sub-Born and Sub-Bond, but Pine is compelling and likable, and he and Knightley work hard to build the chemistry and make you care. Branagh grandstands and almost pulls it off. No, it all fails. Like, you see Chris Pine and Keira Knightley, and they have some romance where, Jack Ryan wants her to marry him. Otherwise, he can't tell her that he works for the CIA. Presumably, once she marries him, he'll be allowed to tell her what's really going on. I find that a little hard to believe about the logic of that, but even if that were true, their romance is just very, like, surface level. You don't get any. I mean, yeah, you see that they met each other at Walter Reed Army Hospital or Medical Center, but you know, you don't see the romance. You don't see why she, what she saw in him or anything. It's just very by the numbers, cookie cutter, cardboard level, like how they met each other and suddenly they're a couple and they're engaged, and none of it's worth a damn. It doesn't help anything in the plot, and nothing in the plot needs that to be there either. It's just, to me, it's like wasted footage because the runtime could have much better been spent showing us actual action and suspense, but we didn't get that, and we got 105 minutes PG-13 of just stuff that went through all the motions, like they had a checklist, but it was a checklist taken of stuff from other films that are a lot better. 2.5 stars, daft story and cheaply told, but there's some good action in there. Well, there might be just a few clever things for a few minutes here and there deep in the movie's running time, but otherwise, no. I'm going to stick with 1 star. 3 stars, good but not overly great. Jack Ryan movie here. Going back to his origins, again, he seems to have originated 3 to 4 times, it seems. Chris Pine is somewhat listless as Ryan, and Costner is there for the paycheck. Lord knows what Branagh is doing, and he also directed. Wow, well, is that true? Did I miss that? Is this actually directed by the villain himself? Yep, directed by Kenneth Branagh. Wow. Okay, sorry, I missed that. So this must be some personal pet project of Kenneth's. Yeah, I don't know if it would have been better if it wasn't, but it is still 53%, and I consider that accurate. But yeah, directed by the guy that played the bad guy. So I'm getting the vibe here that maybe he was a little too close to his own material here. Maybe that's what went wrong. Maybe he thinks he's, maybe it's a case of somebody should have stepped in and fixed his problems, but they were afraid to. I don't know. What do I have on major plot problems on my list? I mentioned the hotel room. Why use this? Why stay in the same hotel room that was obviously compromised? Nobody in the movie seemed to give a fuck about that. Yeah, why doesn't the FSB know what's going on? Like, this bad guy villain, he's doing all this stuff in this Russian corporation, and how come nobody else? I mean, it's a very cardboard, cartoony version of Russia. Um, it's like you're assuming that just because there's maybe some group, and maybe it is the FSB, maybe there's some shadowy guy in some faction of the FSB that's running this whole thing, this scheme to collapse the Western financial markets. Do you think that the rest of the Russian government would be on board with this plan? It's not believable. I'm sorry. I'm not saying the Russians have to be the good guys, but the idea that nobody else in Russia, in any other agency, intelligence or not, or law enforcement would know, would have anything to add complicating this story. Like, it's very much like a cartoon villain version of Russia. There wasn't enough motivation. Okay, let's say some faction within, some rogue faction within the Russian government wanted to collapse the Western financial system for whatever, for their own gain. It's not believable that the actual legitimate Russian government, whether that's Putin or whoever, would think that that was a good idea. I'm sorry, I just can't believe that. You're going to have to give me a lot more. This movie just had Russia as just like being run by some cartoon bad guys, like a Bond villain was running Russia. And not a very exciting Bond villain at that. That's how dumb this just seems to me. It's not believable at all. Again, far-fetched. Yeah, the CIA seems to figure out a whole lot of things when it needs to, very conveniently and quickly, far beyond what I would believe would be true. And yet, at other parts of the movie, the CIA is just clueless and they need Jack Ryan to figure things out for them. With all the resources of the CIA, it's only Jack Ryan that can figure out everything that's going on. You know, he figures out this super complicated plot that's going on in Russia, but the rest of the CIA is completely clueless about this without him. This is not believable. No way, no how. there's a big problem with the final action at the last part of this movie. Jack Ryan, he's got a bomb. There's this bomb that's going to go off, and he has to dispose of it before it's going to go off. And he goes underground. It's like underneath the financial center in Wall Street, underground storm drains. And he defeats this bad guy villain and drives the bomb out of this underground storm drain that's going to blow up Wall Street. And he drives it off, the harbor into, I don't know, whatever it is there outside of Manhattan, the water. He drives the van off into the water, and the explosion is like, mitigated by the water, and that's how he saves everybody. But all these like dozens and dozens of police and FBI and everybody else rush down into the storm drains from every point because they know exactly where he is. And he drives out of there and never passes them on the way out. And it's part of this big giant action sequence at the end, and it's completely contrived and ridiculous in every way. And it also features another one-on-one fight between Chris Pines, Jack Ryan, and some generic henchman around and inside this cargo van in the storm drain. And again, it's edited very sloppily to try to make it look like they're hitting each other when they're obviously not. And the action's so juvenile. I mean, it's obvious that I'm going to either say that Chris Pine can't do this type of action, or the director didn't know how to do it himself. One of the two or both of those, because it's obvious it's all fake. It looks fake. It's not believable in any regard. And Chris Pine's not an old man, so I don't know why they had to fake this all with funny camera angles and whatnot, but it looks completely fake as shit. It's not convincing, and it's completely stupid. The whole last final scene action sequence is completely stupid in every way. It's not believable. This whole thing, I'm just going to say, overall, far-fetched in every way there is. There's almost nothing redeemable here. The reason I would say that I give it 1 star and not half a star, though, is because I didn't actually fast-forward it or shut it off. And if I had fast-forwarded this, instant half a star, because that would have been straight-up boredom. I will say this is not straight-up boring. At no point of this was I straight-up bored, so I'm going to give it 1 star. I'm amazed I wasn't bored, because boring is the worst thing a film can be. This one's not quite there. So if you have absolutely nothing to watch, then go ahead and watch this, I guess. I wouldn't recommend you do that. If you want to watch a Jack Ryan story, do not watch this one. It's just going to turn you off to the whole thing. Stick with the Amazon series, or watch even The Hunt for Red October, the first one of these movies with Sean Connery. Watch any of them. Watch any of them before you watch this one, unless you're just a completist and you've seen all the other ones. But I do not recommend this. I recommend spending your time somewhere else, and I will see you again on the next episode of Rotten Reviews.